Chapter 3. Into the Woods. Philip left on horseback and galloped from the castle without a backward glance. Joanna refused to head north and instead led them on a roundabout journey that would eventually arrive in Altor. She tried to find out more about what had happened, and Philip said only that his father wasn't behind the thieves. Once they had stopped and set up camp for the night, Philip tried to stay awake as long as he could to enjoy Joanna's quiet, comforting company. He wanted no part of his dreams. But as always, when Philip finally gave in and closed his eyes to rest, he was in the forest again. His dream world felt old. Towering trunks brimmed with emerald leaves, their branches creaking beneath the weight of a canopy so thick it blotted out the sky. Moss blanketed the gnarled roots of blackthorns, and briars crowded the forest floor in fragrant full bloom. The breeze, steeped with damp evergreen and overripe black currant, whipped through the wood with a whistle. The trees went on as far as he could see. They were the same trees that greeted him every night when he fell asleep. He had tried to find his way out of the forest as a child, but the forest had grown closer, and the tree leaves had twisted into impassable veils, herding him to the same place, a great thorn wall. The wall was jagged and uneven, and Philip couldn't exactly remember when it had appeared. But over time, it had torn through trunks and rocks with thorns as long as swords. The wall split the forest so thoroughly that Philip had never found its end. Despite trying to walk around it hundreds of times, the bramble still grew, slithering deeper into the wood. With every dream Philip spent there, the forest lost ground with each restless night. "Hello again," Philip mumbled, patting the moss. He could never have a restful night when he needed it. "You're as ugly as ever." The thorn wall loomed a few paces away, a wound of sickly yellow and rotting brown against the forest's lush greenery. He had tried to peek through it, climb over it, and dig beneath it, but the vines always snapped shut like a dragon's maw. Philip walked along the wall. At least he couldn't hear her tonight. Maybe the universe was being merciful and giving him peace in his dreams for the first time in... "No, no, no," came a girl's familiar voice. The universe hated him. She laughed, the high peal of it grating in his ears. "Pan, you cannot eat Ear's hat. This is supposed to be a proper garden party." Philip had been haunted by the sound of the girl's voice for years. Philip didn't know her, couldn't see her through the wall, and couldn't communicate with her at all. In the end, he supposed he didn't even know if she was real or imagined. All he could do was listen to her going on about her day-to-day life. It would have been like listening to a bedtime story if he didn't find her presence so irritating. As she cared for her animal friends, she continually told them about her various travels around the continent and all the different people she met during her wandering. Even worse, he had eventually realized that the girl could hear his daily happenings as well. She had detailed parts of his life to her friends, though fortunately, he had only ever heard her talking about him to her animal companions and not to any of the humans she described having met on her travels. And, trapped in the dream wood, he had been forced to listen to her commentary on his life. He hadn't cared for the way she described him as "some boy who dreams of me and my life" to a friendly owl one day. It made it sound like he was responsible for it. He didn't want to hear about her life any more than she wanted him to. "Thank you all for coming. I believe we all know why we're here. There is a monster in our midst." The girl hesitated, and Philip perked up. She had never mentioned any sort of monster living near her. "One of you ate every single one of the custard tarts," I made last night, and I want to know who." Philip rolled his eyes and slumped again. Her little investigations had lost all their fun when he realized it was always the squirrel. "Now, Ears can hop, but not high enough to get into the window," she said. "Pan is too loud to steal anything while I sleep." Ears was a rabbit. Pan was a goat. Philip was tired. "Truly the most monstrous thing of all what has occurred," Philip whispered to himself. "Regale me with the dangerous robbery so that I may annoy that poor dream boy with the tail." He crawled onto a low branch near the wall. A soft humming drifted through the cracks, and Philip closed his eyes. When the dream girl wasn't talking, she was singing. But singing, at least, allowed him to respite. Sleeping should have. "But what you were all unaware of was that I suspected treachery," she said, and clapped. That was funny, he hated to admit. But it still wasn't fair that this stranger consumed so much of his life. She and Princess Aurora would have made great friends. Why wasn't I defending them? "I was busy sitting through that dream boy's fighting with his father," she said. And unlike in every other dream, her voice wasn't muffled at all. Hearing her clearly was worse than when he had been forced to listen to her telling a deer about his final trial as a page. "Do not talk about me," he muttered, and raised a hand at the wall. He was very rude to that Joanna of his. She huffed and waited for a response again. "I know, it is completely uncalled for." Philip rolled his eyes. "You're uncalled for. He thinks nothing matters," she said, "but he—" "Don't pretend you know me," Philip yelled. A vine from the wall struck out like a serpent and slammed 2 thorns into his hand. Philip cursed and stuck his hurt thumb into his mouth. "You're in a prickly mood tonight." "I'm in a what?" shrieked the girl. Philip toppled out of the tree, his eyes widening. "What?" She couldn't be responding to him. She couldn't hear him. Never in all the years they had been dreaming of each other had they been able to talk to each other. He had tried to speak with her when he was younger, and she had tried to talk to him. However, it had never worked. This was absurd. "Don't what me?" the dream girl shouted. "What are you doing here? What did you do?" At least that confirmed he wasn't imagining it. She was talking to him, and how dare she blame him? "What am I doing here?" Philip rolled to his knees, yanked a twig from his hair, and tossed it at the wall. The vine snapped it in two. "What are you doing here? This is my dream." "Your dream?" He could hear her stomp her foot against the ground, leaves crunching under the force of her heel. "I was having a perfectly nice dream without your interference for once. Philip held out a hand and laughed. "You're dreaming? But I'm dreaming. That's how this works. I dream of your life, you dream of mine, and thankfully never the two shall meet. And if you are dreaming, who are you talking to? Yourself?" She hissed, and he could practically hear the scowl she surely wore. "It's none of your business who I talk to. And why exactly are we in each other's dreams anyway? We don't know each other." "I don't know. I always assumed I'd dream you up," he said. "And since you're really just a part of my imagination, you don't know either." "I'm not any part of you," she laughed. "I don't even know who you are." Exactly what a dream might say. The thorns rustled, as though blocking her from peeking through, and she muttered, "You're ridiculous." All right, Philip would never call himself ridiculous. Being able to communicate with the mystery dream girl wasn't anything like he'd imagined, and he didn't know what to do. She was more irritable than he thought she would be. What had changed that made them able to talk now after years of lonely assumptions? What's ridiculous is you practicing what you're going to say to animals who have no idea what you're saying ever, Philip said, and took a seat with his back to the wall. Her affronted stutter made him smile. Seriously, how are we going to prove we're not the other's dream? She laughed under her breath, so different from the bubbly sound he was used to when she was alone. I don't feel like a dream. Completely unhelpful, he sighed and rubbed his face. How would either of them know what a dream feels like? All right, where do you live? He had never been able to hear anything remotely about where she was. Why would his mind do that? Oh, the thorn wall writhed and twisted, the snapping of thorns drowning out her words. With my aunts. Maybe his mind wasn't clever enough to come up with a location. I couldn't make out a word of that, he said. Of course you couldn't, said the girl with a scoff. Where do you live? Artwine? No, your voice didn't carry, she said. He laughed. Funny, how you made that sound like it's my fault. I haven't decided how at fault you are yet, she said, the rustling sound of her pacing from grass to stone changing with each step. Let's start simpler. What's your name? I've never been able to hear that. Only the name of your friends. He snorted, delighted with her in a way he hadn't expected. I haven't decided if I'll tell you that yet. They stewed in silence, neither willing to break, and Philip did admire her resolve. She was almost as stubborn as him. You're incorrigible, she finally said. I'm Briar Rose. Almost. The name fit her. She had always been a thorn in his side. My name is Philip. Odd name, said Briar Rose. Says the girl named for a bush, he laughed. It's a flower. It's right there in... Don't ruin my joke with an explanation. Philip kept as much bite as he could out of the comment and got as close to the wall as he dared. He could barely hear her laughing on the other side. So earlier, were you pretending there were animals with you, or are there animals on your side of the wall? I was pretending, she said, almost sounding embarrassed. There are never any creatures in this wood, only us. Philip hadn't played pretend in a long time. Princes had no time for playing knight or sparring with shadows. But from what he had overheard throughout the years, Briar Rose had any number of tutors and friends to speak with. Given the stories she had told the real animals of her travels, why bother pretending? Why are we sharing a dream now? This can't be the first time we've been asleep at the same time, right? Philip asked. No, we've definitely been asleep at the same time. I don't think we've ever heard each other in real time before. No matter when we're asleep or awake, we dream of the other. He sighed. It was the truth that he had lived most of his life. My main concern is, why us? She asked with a huff. Why are we, of all people, trapped together, and why have we always only heard specific pieces of the other's life? Trapped? He was surprised she felt the same. No idea. This place doesn't obey time, I suppose, but it always had rules. Why break them now? He asked. I don't know, said Briar Rose. I talk to you sometimes, when I was awake and alone, in case you were dreaming of me, but I don't think you ever were. To his dismay, his heart clenched at that. He had heard some of those moments, but he couldn't stand to know if she had ever listened to him whispering to her as a kid, begging for understanding and comfort. I mostly just thought about how much of my life you could spy on, and hated it. And you think I didn't feel the same? She asked dryly. He licked his lips, thinking of something to ask that wasn't about why or how, but about them and their shared lives. But before he could speak, she continued. So what has changed recently that allowed us to speak? Have you done anything that could have caused this? Philip rolled his lips together, trying to think of what to say. No matter how much she annoyed him, they were in this together. No, I've always dreamed of the wood, but I only started hearing you a few years after that. I was young, though, and I don't remember exactly when it was. I have done nothing unusual recently. The dreams hadn't started until after Maleficent's curse, and Briar Rose had come some years later. The dreams were frustrating, but she terrified him. A person he didn't know who could hear everything he said so long as she was dreaming, and he could do nothing about it. He had no idea when she was listening or whom she could hear. Knowing her better would give him back some modicum of control over his life. He opened his mouth to ask her a question, but she beat him to it. "Do you think it's magic?" she asked. He snorted. "Magic? No. No one could use magic to do something as useless as this." Nothing good came from magic. Fairies might have gifted Princess Aurora beauty and song, but neither had done the girl any good. All they had given Philip was a betrothed he never asked for and expectations. Then there was Maleficent. Gifts and curses didn't seem so different. But as much as he hoped his run-in with the thieves hadn't been magical, it was the only new thing to have happened in his life. They weren't connected to this, though. They couldn't be. She clucked her tongue against her teeth. "Well, I don't have the faintest clue about magic other than what I've read. I've never told anyone, except the animals, of course, about these dreams. But I've also never read any mention of anything like this. Nothing at all has changed in my life recently. Oh, unless you count one of my aunts going to town. But she does that sometimes. You're traveling with your friend Joanna, aren't you? I do like her poetry." "You would," he mumbled. "Look, neither of us seems to know anything about magic or dreams. So how about we talk about our lives, finally, or take exceptionally quiet naps? Where's your favorite place you've traveled?" "Naps?" she asked, ignoring his other question. "In a dream?" "Naps." Briar Rose sighed. Philip leaned back, hating the silence. They could finally talk to each other, and she didn't seem the least bit curious about him or interested in anything or in answering his questions. "But this has never happened before." Briar Rose made a sound like an angry fox. "Maybe this forest needs our help in real life." "Then go play hero," Philip snapped, his patience gone. "Why does it matter anyway?" She was quiet for a moment, and then said, "Maybe if we figure out why we're dreaming of each other, we can finally have real, restful dreams." Oh, she wanted to be rid of him. Good. Philip couldn't fault her for that, when he had wished for the same thing. "That's the first interesting thing you've ever said," he sat up, and pushed his desire to know her out of his mind. "Well, thankfully, we'll find out soon enough if this is a permanent change or not," Briar Rose says. Philip groaned. "No offense, but I'll be thankful if this is the last dream like this we ever have." "No offense?" she asked and laughed. "We both know you said it with all offense possible." A hand gripped his shoulder, but when he looked, there was nothing there. His vision blurred. Her voice wavered. Someone in the real world was waking him up. "You said it, not me." "Remember that," said Philip, closing his eyes and letting darkness wash over him. "I think this is it for me."